persevering diplomacy. Jaishankar added, "We've been negotiating since September 2020 when I met my counterpart Wang Yi in Moscow. I think it creates a basis for peace and tranquility, which should be there in the border areas, which in fact did exist before 2020. We will be able to come back to that." Now, patrolling came to a halt in 2020, after which the two sides accepted buffer zones in some areas of the dispute that denied the militaries their normal patrolling routes. Today, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian said the two sides have reached a resolution on the relevant matters which China speaks highly of. Going forward, China will work with India to implement these resolutions. The Chinese side did not offer any details, but the spokesperson added, "Over a recent period, China and India have been in close communication through diplomatic and military channels on issues related to the China-India border." According to India, the agreement marks a significant step towards disengagement, particularly in the remaining friction points, indicating the sensitive areas of Depsang Plains and Demchok. China watchers say while this is a significant step in defusing tensions between the two countries, India should be cautious about China's motives. Multiple questions still remain unanswered. Will the disengagement lead to de-escalation between the two sides? Will China go back on its land grabs in Depsang and Demchok? Will the Chinese troops withdraw from these areas? Will we return to status quo ante? Will the border go back to being the way it was in 2020? Experts say in the past few years, China has built permanent infrastructure in Ladakh. What about those Chinese settlements? In the past, India has maintained that disengagement would only constitute the beginning and that normalcy at the line of actual control can only follow after de-induction and demobilization of troops that China has amassed at the LAC, leading to counter-deployments by India. The question also being asked is, will we see that happening in the foreseeable future? Some say the new agreement might imply that Indian troops whose access to certain patrolling points along the LAC was blocked either by Chinese troops or due to the implementation of the buffer zones created in the aftermath of disengagement at specific friction points could possibly access them again in the near future. All eyes will now be on that meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping tomorrow. Just what will the two leaders discuss? Can we expect any major breakthrough? Although the two leaders met 18 times between 2014 and 2020, they have spoken publicly only twice since the Galwan Valley clashes of 2020. Once on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Indonesia in 2022, and then the BRICS summit in South Africa in 2023. Could the two leaders, through their bilateral talks in Kazan, pave the way for the next important step of de-escalation between India and China, or is that too optimistic a view?
The agreement that has been reached, let me restate what I said earlier. I think what I have said speaks for itself and is fairly clear. There has been, you're aware of the events that took place in 2020 in several areas along the line of actual control. We've been in discussions with Chinese interlocutors, both at a diplomatic level, through the WMCC, as was mentioned earlier as well, and through the at the military level as well, through meetings of the military commanders at various levels. These discussions had in the past resulted in the resolution of standoffs at various locations. You're also aware that there were a few areas and few locations where the standoff had not been resolved. Now, as a result of the discussions that have taken place over the last several weeks, an agreement has been arrived at on patrolling arrangements along the line of actual control in the India-China border areas, and this is leading to disengagement and eventually a resolution of the issues that had arisen in these areas in 2020.
近段时间以来，中印双方通过外交和军事渠道就中印边境的有关问题保持密切沟通。目前，双方已就有关问题达成了解决方案，中方对此予以积极评价， 下一步，中方将与印方落实好上述解决方案。
Well, I think what Foreign Secretary has said is what I can also say, that for those who have not heard that we reached an agreement on patrolling, and with that, the disengagement, we have gone back to where the situation was in 2020, and we can say with that the disengagement process with China, you can say has been completed. So, so far I would say that's as much as I can share with you. I'm sure in due course iske details वगैरह निकलेंगे. You see, there are areas which for various reasons after 2020, because they had blocked us, so we had blocked them. So दो तरफा था, Bob. So what has happened is we have reached an understanding which will allow the patrolling. For example, you spoke about Depsang. That's not the only place. There are other places also. So I think the understanding, to my knowledge, is that we will be able to do the patrolling which we were doing in 2020.
Now the last point is about China. So as well as some statements have already been given out. So what does it mean? As far as we are concerned, we were looking at that we want to go back to the status quo of April 2020. Point number one. Thereafter, we will be looking at disengagement, de-escalation, normal management of line of actual control. And this normal management of line actual control will not just stop there. There are phases in that also. So this what I am saying, it has been our stance from April 20 itself when Vaite Joshi was the army commander, and even today that remains the same. So as of now, what has happened? We are trying to restore the trust. How the trust will get restored? It will get restored once we are able to see each other. And we are able to convince each other, look, the buffer zones which are there, which have been created, we are not creeping. And both have to reassure each other. Patrolling gives you that kind of advantage. So that's what is something which is commencing. And as we restore the trust, the other stages will also follow through. I think this is the diplomatic answer given by the
All right, so a lot of optimism being expressed there, at least by the Indian side, on this border agreement between India and China. What does it really mean? Let's dissect this with our guest. Joining me on Global Lens tonight is Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar, former Indian diplomat. Dr. Sanjay Pandey, Professor of Russian Studies at the JNU, will be with us in just a moment. We're also hoping to be joined by Major General Ashwini Sivaj, Defense and Security expert, and Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. For now, let me go across to Manish Chand, Senior Journalist who covers foreign affairs. He is in fact in Kazan, where all the action is, closely watching and covering the BRICS summit. Manish, welcome to Global Lens. Good to have you back on the show. Let me begin by asking you that while Prime Minister Modi met with President Putin today, and he is expected to shortly meet with the Iranian president, many had widely expected a bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and the Chinese president today. Would it be correct to say that now that is likely to take place tomorrow? What further details can you share with us on that, Manish? Because that really will be the most awaited bilateral, really, of this summit, at least as far as India is concerned.
Neha, thanks for having me on the show. I think the big story coming from Kazan, the BRICS summit here, is the confirmed, almost confirmed meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping. The meeting could not take place today because Prime Minister, since he arrived in Kazan, had a very packed day. But my sources have confirmed that this meeting will indeed take place tomorrow. And as you know, the stage for this was carefully prepared. Just ahead of the BRICS summit, PM's departure for the BRICS summit, Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri announced that patrolling agreement. saying that all remaining issues have been resolved. So this was a major, major breakthrough. There was a closure of sorts, paving the way for a very productive and constructive meeting. Now, the important thing is that after these 4 years of frosty tides and all that has happened and the bad blood we saw, what can one expect looking ahead, right? So I think the disengagement, the modalities of patrolling and all that, they have not been revealed to us exactly. But in the sum and substance of it is that that Chinese troops, that India will return to patrolling in areas where they were patrolling pre-2020. This is what our Foreign Minister, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has been said countless times, that only disengagement of troops and restoration of status quo will lead to any normalization of relations. So now that condition has been satisfied, the stage is set, to my mind, for a very constructive meeting. And looking ahead, this is not just what Foreign Secretary announced. For the last 3 months or so especially, there were very positive signals. The meetings of core commanders ended on a very positive note. Chinese ambassador held a conference organized by Center for Global India Insights, where he spelled out the areas in which India and China can cooperate in the future. Among them, more investment, trade, infrastructure. Before the ties froze after the Galwan clashes, we had something like 30 bilateral dialogues focused on different areas. So, this is all going to be tomorrow's talks will set the agenda. And let me tell you what happened. This is what is happening now in Kazan is a sort of replay of what happened in Xiamen, the BRICS summit a few years ago. At that point, the Doklam conflict, the Doklam crisis was casting a big shadow over India-China ties. And just ahead of the BRICS summit, the problem got resolved, leading to a meeting. And this meeting in Xiamen was extremely constructive, paving the way for informal summit in Wuhan and later on in Mamallapuram in India. So I have a feeling, of course, the informal summits unlikely to resume so fast. There will be incremental progress. But this meeting will indeed chart some sort of roadmap that where you can cooperate.
The big
and one
question,
of the reasons
Manish.
Also why, yeah.
Will tomorrow's bilateral talks lay out some kind of a roadmap for, I don't know if we can really look at resumption of formal dialogue at this point, but at least some sort of progress towards restoration of peace along the line of actual control, given the kind of tensions and friction that have existed over the last 4 years. Hold that thought, Manish. I'll come back to you in just a moment. Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar, let me come to you. Incremental progress. That is a term we hear all too often in the context of diplomacy, especially when you are dealing with intractable issues such as the India-China border dispute. But what does this new border agreement between India and China really mean? Jaishankar says this means that patrolling resumes and we go back to the position that existed in 2020. However, a lot has changed, sir, between then and now, including the creation of the buffer zones, the heavy deployment of troops to the tune of 50 to 60,000 on either side, and then there are those permanent Chinese settlements that have come up in Ladakh. So, it is easier said than done, isn't it? My question to you is, how optimistic are you following the announcement of this agreement? And realistically, what should we expect from tomorrow's meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping?
Yeah, thank you very much, Neha. Yes, I am, I think this announcement by Vikram Misri and Dr. Jaishankar This did really take people by surprise, although there had been sort of, considerable movement over the last few weeks and months, even when Mr. Doval had gone to St. Petersburg for the BRICS summit of the NSAs, etc., and he met Wang Yi there. And otherwise, meetings that had taken place between Dr. Jaishankar and again Wang Yi in, on the sidelines of the some of the ASEAN meetings and so on and so forth. So people knew that there was very hectic activity, so something could be expected. But the fact that, this whole thing was sprung upon the people yesterday, that came as quite a surprise. Now, I think it has to be welcomed, meaning, after all, 4.5 years, our troops, 50,000, 60,000 of them have been posted there on the borders at the line of actual control. And if this agreement, this understanding, I think, mind you, it is not an agreement that has been signed, anything that has been signed so far. And we have seen that even when there were agreements, 93, 96, Chinese don't pay any, treated with complete disregard and moved in 2020. And we have seen in other areas also, whether it was Demchok in 2013, Depsang in 2013, Demchok in 2014, when Xi Jinping was here in September of 2014. So, they absolutely with great impunity, they walk into Indian territory, and then when they are confronted, then they move back. You would have seen in 2013, same happened. 2014, when they moved into, Demchok and Chumar, that is what happened. And of course, in 2017, that was in Bhutanese territory in Doklam. So I would like to see the detailed agreement because, as it is said, the devil is in the detail. So I would like to see exactly what has been achieved, because what has been mentioned that, patrolling can resume, which means that the buffer zones will no longer exist. Now, the second question that you posed was 50,000, 60,000 troops. Now, I would imagine that, disengagement will lead to de-escalation and will lead to de-induction, which would really imply that all the soldiers who are posted there, they will get posted back to their own barracks much before the line of actual control. But that still leaves the problem, Neha, as you raised, the third issue that you raised, that a lot of infrastructure has been created by China in the area adjoining, proximate to the line of actual control, which means that it gives an advantage to China that when it again wants to mess with India, it can move in very quickly because it has the infrastructure there. And India does not have the infrastructure at the moment. I think what we really need to do is we need to continue to construct create the infrastructure. We have been doing that, whether it is, near Daulat Beg Oldi or any of the other areas, in terms of constructing roads and bridges and tunnels. So I think we need to continue to do that so that this advantage that China has, that can also be, that can also be nullified to the extent possible. The last point that I would like to make is that over the last few weeks and months, we have seen that it has been China which has been particularly, pushing, they have at the level of their defense officers, commandants, they have been giving out these readouts that we have made so much of progress with India on settling the issues between the two sides. And there has been, on the other hand, the Indian side has been rather reticent. Indian side has been rather conservative in terms of, responding to what the Chinese side have been saying. Now, on this case, it is both, the Foreign Secretary and External Affairs Minister who have spoken. And from the Chinese side, when the Foreign Office spokesperson spoke, she spoke, in a very guarded way. She was not very forthcoming in terms of either details or, excited about announcing this particular development. So, and the bottom line, the final point is that, China cannot be trusted. And we heard the army chief saying that, we'll have to develop trust, we'll have to recreate the trust. So we will really have to walk very, very cautiously, very, very carefully, not let our guard down under any circumstances, and keep our powder dry for any eventuality that might take place. While I welcome this development, but I would like to really see the fine print that both the sides are able to agree to.
One couldn't agree more with you, Ambassador. China is not a country that can be trusted if past experience is anything to go by. And you're right, not for the first time, the Chinese side has been rather opaque in even commenting on this issue, offering no details whatsoever. All that the Foreign Ministry spokesperson said is that the two sides have reached a resolution on the relevant matters. And going forward, China will work with India to implement these resolutions. Let me now go across to Dr. Sanjay Pandey at this point. Dr. Pandey, we will discuss the meeting that took place between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin in just a moment. But let me first ask you, all eyes seem to be on the highly anticipated bilateral that's expected tomorrow between Prime Minister Modi and the Chinese president. The question simply is, what can we expect from this meeting? I think it would be safe to say that we need to keep our expectations and enthusiasm in check at this point in time, even as we wait for more details of this new border agreement to emerge, because we are still trying to wrap our heads around what it actually means on the ground.
Thank you, Neha. Cautious optimism. If I have to describe what's going to happen and how one should see it, I would say, and Ambassador Sajanhar, in fact, without using the word cautious optimism, very much implied that this is how one should look at it. There is some cause for optimism, but as you very rightly said, the Chinese have not really come out with any clarity about what they intend to do, whether joint patrolling or patrolling in areas which were earlier patrolled by Indian forces, whether they are going to allow, whether they are going to dismantle the infrastructure that they have created in the last 4 years. These are the moot points that have not been cleared, and we can only hope that in days to come there will be more clarity on it. As of now, we can only keep our fingers crossed, and we can only hope that there will be some positive movement. This is important because these summit meetings, as pointed out earlier, just after the earlier Galwan clash, there were reasons to believe that the Chinese are going to take it very seriously. They also don't want to send a wrong message to the world. They want to be seen as responsible global players who know how to deal with their neighbors. So this is perhaps the reason why the timing of this announcement about mutual agreement has come about, because the Chinese want to send a positive signal to the BRICS and to the world at large that they are a responsible global player. But at the same time, whether some of the expectations that have been raised in India, especially in the media, whether these expectations are going to be fulfilled or not, we still have to wait for that. We have to keep our fingers crossed, and we have to keep our powder dry, as Ambassador Sajanhar very rightly said.
Fingers crossed, but keep our powder dry at the same time. That really seems to be the big takeaway from this conversation so far. Major General Ashwini Sivash is also with us. We will get a military perspective from him on this entire issue in just a moment after this quick break on Global Lens.
For the very first time in our investigation, we unmasked the killer of Ravindra Matre.
In 5G, we have to stand with the world, and in 6G, we have to lead the world.
Winning a Grammy was an absolutely surreal experience.
Cooking is an act of love. The first act of love we receive from our mothers in the families.
Modern Indian food is all about contemporary and innovative approach to traditional Indian cooking.
Representation it's also important, no?
I want to wear this white coat every day and then be a chef.
There are stories. If the name of whiskey is Indri, then there is a whole story behind that.
Cooking food is like a therapy, and eating one is like a pleasure I can give it to myself. With Lounge Nights, I'm on a journey to celebrate and recognize the best food and nightlife establishments in various cities across India.
Radical presents Lounge Nights every Saturday and Sunday only on News9 Live.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. We're discussing the BRICS summit that's underway in Kazan in Russia and that highly anticipated bilateral meeting that's expected to take place on the sidelines of the summit between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping tomorrow. Let me go across to Major General Ashwini Sivaj. General Sivaj, for us lesser mortals, please explain, what does this new border agreement between India and China really mean? Yes, patrolling will resume as it did till 2020. However, a lot of important questions still remain unanswered, sir. Will this disengagement lead to de-escalation and demobilization of troops? What about China's land grabs in Depsang and Demchok?
Yeah, Neha, one thing is very clear, that it's a forward movement and it is a win-win situation for both countries. But certainly there are a number of grey areas. First of all, there were 5 friction points. One was north and south of Pangangsu, the another one was Gogra Hot Spring, and this was the 4th and 5th were Depsang and Demchok. As far as north and south of Pangangsu is concerned, and also Gogra Hot Spring, they were by and large resolved by making buffer zone. Now, that possibly will continue. That's not going to be changed in that. What was not being resolved was Depsang and Depchok. What are the problems in Depsang and Demchok? Now, there are certain problems which have started off somewhere in April 2020, when our traditional patrol point 10 to 13, the Chinese were not letting us go to those traditional patrolling points, and they were basically stopped. And India also eventually stopped certain patrolling point of the Chinese. Remember, this is not an international border; it is line of actual control. Both sides feel that their boundary is to a different area. We think that we are toward Chinese side. Chinese feel that they are on the Indian side, because no boundaries are demarcated on the ground. Having said so, this problem of basically of Depsang is not only 2020, it is also on 2013, when they have slightly come inside, and also in the Chumar area. Having said so, what has happened now? Now, it is only been disengagement to an extent that our patrol point which were there 10 to 13 and also charting Nala in Demchok, our patrol will able to go there. Does it mean that there will be de-escalation and de-induction? I don't think so. Because the point is, we have already moved 50 to 60,000 troops there. We have made an infrastructure, a habitat for that. We also know
that you can't believe what Chinese says and what they do on ground. And the area and the terrain to the Chinese side is far, far better and plain, that in case there is a requirement of coming back, they can come within 2-3 hours. That is not true with India. So therefore, we will not take chance. I don't think that after this disengagement, only talk about patrolling rights restored, that you will able to visit those patrolling points, which you usually go once in a week or almost in a fortnight. Nothing more than that. This does not mean that there will be a de-escalation and de-induction of troops from Eastern Ladakh. We have about 3 divisions. We have made a habitat for them. Our airfield have come up. Our logistic nodes have come up. I don't think they will come back or de-induct so soon. What will happen in future, that time will only tell. Now the point come is, Neha, why Depsang is very hard not to crack, and why China is so much interested in Depsang. You see, Depsang is strategically important to both, to China as well as India. As far as China is concerned, that this gives them a leverage that from the east, from Sidechain, the China, and from the west, from Pakistan, from Gilgit-Baltistan, can sandwich the Nubra Valley and Sidechain Glacier. And therefore, they will like to come as close to DPO as possible toward the western side. At the same time, this area of DPO is very important for India, because from here, you can interdict the China-Pakistan economic corridor, Karakoram highway, and also their western highway going from Xinjiang to Lhasa. So that is why it is a hard nut to crack. It is only a partial, I can say, move forward to an extent that the patrolling rights have been restored. Nothing more than that. One can't say that it will eventually move to de-induction, de-escalation. It will time only will tell. Now the question comes is, can you believe on China? Of course you can't believe on China. Is it a correct move? It is a good move, because after all, what we were doing in April 2020, we can now proceed and go our patrolling point. Will the buffer zone in other area will continue, or they will no more buffer zone? I don't think there is a clarity. To me, it looks like the buffer zone will remain, because buffer zone basically give us safety margin so that both the parties do not come eyeball to eyeball, and there are chances of confrontation. So to that extent, it will remain. Neha.
All right. And then, of course, there is always that question of how do you really trust China? Let me go back to Manish Chand at this point. Manish, correct me if I'm wrong, but Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping met as many as 18 times between 2014 and 2020. But since the Galwan Valley clashes of 2020 that left 20 Indian soldiers dead, they have met only twice on the sidelines of 2 summits, the G20 summit in Indonesia in 2022 and the BRICS summit in South Africa in 2023. Now, the question really is, what are you picking up from your sources on the ground? We don't really expect the 2 leaders to make any major announcement tomorrow, to announce any breakthrough as such, do we?
Yes, you are right. The point is that it's a breakthrough of sorts. What happened before the meeting, that the fact that the border, the disengagement process, the patrolling deal leading to it. But I personally feel that, given that, it was a question of territorial sovereignty, you see, and that is why the meetings, there was such a short, there was pull-aside meeting. There were no proper meetings since Galwan. There were no structured meeting. This is probably the first time there will be a meeting, a proper meeting. And, the leaders of 2 big countries don't meet just for the sake of it. So there will be some significant development. Something will be announced. Probably there will be Chinese side will be reticent about this details of the deal. And in fact, both sides, maybe they're trying to work it, the final modalities behind the scenes. But what one can expect is some sort of roadmap for relations. Number one, would that be a resumption of dialogue? I think there could be some, as I say, incremental resumption. So it may not be a full scale, as I said, before the Galwan crisis. And in normal times, we had something like 30 sectoral dialogues specific dialogues. So what one can expect probably is some sort of dialogue on economic thing, because economic thing is also driving both sides. So you see what has happened since Galwan is that despite the two sides not talking formally, the bilateral trade has in fact grown to $125 billion plus. And along with that, trade deficit has grown humongously. So we are looking at a trade deficit of around $100 billion. What it means effectively is that this $100 billion is going out of the country. So Indian industry, the government, and that's why, before this, there was a paper by the Niti Aayog, and it was also mentioned in the budget survey that to encourage China to invest in India as a way of reducing trade deficit. So there is an economic compulsion because we did ban Chinese apps and other things, other punitive economic steps were taken. But economic relations, trade at least thrived. And this was because structurally our industry continues to depend on supplies of intermediary goods from India. We don't have a robust, strong infrastructure sector. Let's face it. For all this talk about rivalry and all that, we have to see our own limitations in some ways. So that is, from India's side, it is driving. It's the economic factor, and I expect something on those lines.
Okay.
That there would be talk about how to address trade deficit. From the Chinese side also. See, China is now quite isolated from the Western world. Their relations are fractured. So they also are looking at India. So what we are looking at, the China and Russia are trying to forge. So far, what was happening was a deepening nexus between Russia and China. And there is a possibility that there could be a trilateral sometime, not tomorrow, but RIC, Russia, India, China. So I think if tomorrow's talk will hold the key, the atmospherics and all we will see, and it's not proper to speculate too much, but I think it will be substantive and productive.
You believe it will be substantive and productive, and that's an interesting thought that at some point in the foreseeable future, maybe we could see some sort of a trilateral dialogue between India, China and Russia. And I'll come to China in our next segment. You talked about the massive trade deficit that exists between India and China. It certainly does, but I think the biggest issue has been the trust deficit that has existed between the two countries since the Galwan clashes of 2020. How do you address that? The Indian Army Chief said we need to restore trust. How do you do that with China? Ambassador Sajjan Har, let me ask you this question. As Manish rightly pointed out, in the last 4 years since those Galwan clashes, ties between the two countries have been so frosty. There hasn't been any kind of structured dialogue between the two leaders. There were only pull asides on the sidelines of two summits. Now we are hoping that they're going to meet tomorrow. And if you recall, Xi Jinping even chose to skip the G20 summit that India hosted in September last year. So the question really is, not that we believe that, India and China are going to be bye-bye again, but do you believe that tomorrow's bilateral talks could in some sort of way pave the way for the resumption of a structured dialogue between the two countries?
Yes, thank you, Neha. I tend to agree with what Manish has said. When the two leaders meet, and I know as far as Prime Minister Modi is concerned, he is always looking at deliverables. He is not meeting, he doesn't want to spend his time meeting leaders or anyone, where there is, nothing that you are able to sort of, after the meeting, you can say that this is what we've been able to achieve. He's looking at deliverables, and I'm sure here also there will be substantive, but it will be broad brush because, if anyone expects that these two leaders are going to get into the nitty-gritty of roadmap and this, that, and the other, that's not going to happen. What they are going to do is that they are going to give instructions to their lieutenants, to the External Affairs Minister and to the Foreign Minister, that this is what your instructions are, take it forward and, proceed on that. So it is going to be, as far as atmospheric is concerned, as far as body language is concerned, I think by and large it's going to be positive. And the messaging that will come out of this will also be positive, that is going to be substantive. because otherwise there is no point in meeting, meaning the whole idea of, announcing this a day before the summit is that you are able to have a meeting and a good meeting and take the relationship forward. And particularly, you see, if you would recall, Neha, that although relations have been frosty over the last 4 years, but the Chinese have been very keen. They have said, everything is good and fine as far as the border is concerned. It is normal, it is stable, etc. And relations on other fronts, whether it is trade, business, investment, etc., they can proceed as normal, as business as it existed earlier. And it is only India that had put its foot down, India that had insisted that we need to see status quo ante restored. Now, of course, you can continue to discuss till the cows go home, come home, that whether it's going to be induction, de-escalation. You see, my point is that when there are leaders like, the External Affairs Minister with the approval of the Prime Minister, I'm sure they have something very significant and substantive in hand. Let us not suggest that this is a very small thing that has come about. Of course, I also mentioned that we need to see the details. I want to see the full agreement before I understand as to what has actually been agreed upon. But I'm sure that it is not a very, even if it's not a very big deal, it's not a small deal. It is, a significant movement forward. We need to take that into account.
Build on that. Okay,
Yeah.
that remains the big question. Can we build on that? What can we expect the two leaders to say tomorrow? Major General Ashwini Savaj, I'll give you the last word on the Modi-Xi meeting. In the past, India has maintained that disengagement would just be the first step. That alone cannot be enough, that ultimately there has to be de-escalation and de-induction and demobilization of troops that China has amassed along the line of actual control. Now, if you are skeptical that, this is not something we're likely to see in the foreseeable future, then my question to you is this something that India is likely to show flexibility on before resumption of formal dialogue between the two countries, or do you think this will continue to be a precondition set by India?
Neha, I think it is one can say work in progress. One can't start telling that if you don't do this, we will not have any talk. I suppose the beginning has been made. They have agreed for disengagement, and the patrolling points now have been opened for both sides, and we will able to go to traditional patrolling point. And very rightly, it is only disengagement. There has to be de-escalation and de-induction. There are about 60,000-70,000 troops of Chinese have come there. They have made infrastructure there. They brought their heavy weaponry, tanks, RT guns, missiles. Now, in case they are not moved, where is the question of we moving back? In 2017, Doklam took place. Doklam was resolved. You said that, of course, now there will not going to be anything else. Then Galwan took place. The Chinese came with 3 divisions. They surprised us. Our intelligence failed. We didn't know that how did they manage to come. And after that, Galwan took place. So the point today is that the Chief of Army Staff has said that we are trying to build up the trust. That there is a trust deficit. What China says and what it does on ground are two different things. And let me tell you one thing, as having been a Chief of Staff of 14 Corps Leh Ladakh for 2 years, I can only say that India has also built up a lot of infrastructure and habitat. We are not going to come back so soon until certain things are resolved. And there is a concrete issue of de-escalation and de-induction. I suppose it will take some time. Trust has to be built up, but it's a good beginning. And point is that why this has happened before the BRICS. I suppose Russia hand is also involved. Russia was very keen before this BRICS take place. There is some sort of bonhomie between China and India, so that to Western world they can show that Russia, China, and India are together. You remember
and
that?
That's exactly what I'm going to discuss, sir. That's exactly what I'm going to discuss in my next segment. So hold that thought. I will come back to you in just a moment. Interestingly, Major General Ashwini Swaraj seems to think that Russia may have also played a role in this agreement that has been reached between India and China. I'll request all our guests to stay on with us as we move now to our next story, which is also linked to the ongoing BRICS summit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi today met his host, Russian President Vladimir Putin, in Kazan. The two leaders met with a warm hug and held bilateral talks on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. Prime Minister Modi conveyed to Putin yet again that India believes in peaceful solutions to conflicts, referring to the Russia-Ukraine war. Prime Minister Modi said, "We have been in touch with all sides in the Russia-Ukraine problem. It has always been our position that all conflicts can be resolved through dialogue. We believe there should be peaceful solutions to conflicts. India is always ready to help bring peace." President Putin told Prime Minister Modi, Russia-India ties have the character of a particularly privileged strategic partnership and continue to actively develop. Now, the BRICS summit visit is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's second visit to Russia this year. He visited Moscow in July to attend the 22nd India-Russia annual summit. India is also a big customer of Russian oil, much to the chagrin of the West. The US and its Western allies have been supporting Ukraine and working to hurt Russia in trade. India has said it will buy oil from anywhere that it gets a good deal, which will benefit the citizens of India. Significantly, Russia has touted the BRICS summit as a diplomatic triumph that shows that Western attempts to isolate Moscow over the Ukraine conflict have failed. The US has dismissed the idea that BRICS could become a geopolitical rival, but has expressed concern over Moscow flexing its diplomatic muscle as the Ukraine conflict rages. Moscow-based political analyst Konstantin Kalachev says Moscow has steadily advanced on the battlefield in eastern Ukraine this year, while strengthening ties with China, Iran and North Korea, three of Washington's adversaries. By gathering BRICS leaders in Kazan, the Kremlin aims to show that not only is Russia not isolated, it has partners and allies. Kalachev adds, this time the Kremlin wants to show an alternative to Western pressure and that the multipolar world is a reality, referring to Moscow's efforts to shift power away from Western nations. Nearly 3 years after Russia's invasion of Ukraine saw Moscow condemned by countries globally, Vladimir Putin is staging a summit with more than a dozen world leaders in a pointed signal that far from being alone, an emerging coalition of countries stands behind him. The 3-day BRICS summit in Kazan is the first meeting of the group of major emerging economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, since it expanded earlier this year to include Egypt, the UAE, Ethiopia and Iran. Leaders who are in attendance include Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, China's Xi Jinping, Iran's Masoud Pezeshkian, South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. It is by far the largest international gathering the Russian president has hosted since the beginning of the Ukraine war in February 2022. The gathering of BRICS and other countries this week spotlights the growing convergence of nations who hope to see a shift in the global balance of power and, in the case of some, like Moscow, Beijing and Tehran, directly counter the United States-led West. It is this message that Putin and his close partner and most powerful BRICS country leader Xi Jinping are perhaps hoping to project, that it is the West that stands isolated in the world with its sanctions and alliances, while a global majority of countries support their bid to challenge American global leadership. Let me take this now to our panelists. Dr. Sanjay Pandey, let me ask you, sir, do you agree with this assessment that the BRICS summit has turned into a major show of strength for Vladimir Putin? The message he is seeking to send out to the West is, you did everything in your power to isolate me. Not only am I not isolated today, far from it, I have friends and allies.
Very true. This clearly shows that there are many countries, non-Western countries, who do not totally agree with the West's position on the Ukraine conflict, who do not see Russia as the only culprit, who believe that there are issues, there are concerns, Russian concerns, which need to be taken seriously, and who believe that the sanctions that the West has imposed have not been totally supported by these countries. So apart from China and India, who have had very good trade with Russia during the last 2.5 years. We now see countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE who have joined BRICS and who are willing to deal with Russia, to do business with Russia. So this only proves once more that the non-West is, and the third world or the global south as it is being referred to now, has a different worldview, are willing to speak out in the global fora about their concerns, about their national interest, and are willing to take an independent position on global issues which may not be congruent with the position of the West. To that extent, this summit once again proves that Russia remains an important player, and there are many countries who are willing to deal with Russia and who are willing to join Russia in the BRICS summit that we are having now.
Interesting. Ambassador Sajanhar, would you agree with that view that while we have definitely seen growing proximity between Russia, China and Iran in recent times, especially in the wake of the sanctions imposed on Russia and, the West's constant efforts to isolate Putin. But do you believe that this BRICS summit actually sends out a very different sort of message, if not a worrying one, to the West, and also perhaps a larger message of the new reality of multipolarity?
Yeah, I think multipolarity is being slowly creeping in, if I could say that, meaning after all, you had bipolar in the first 40 years, 50, 45 years after the Second World War, 10 years we had the unipolar moment, and after 9/11 and particularly after 2007, 2008 financial economic crisis, the world has started becoming increasingly multipolar. And I think the agency of a large number of countries, that has been increasing both economically as well as politically and strategically. So it has been growing, and this is a reflection of that. But I think it will be wrong to take, BRICS in a, it's as it has been mentioned, it's a non-Western grouping. It's a non-Western platform. It's not an anti-Western platform. Definitely, India would not stand with any sort of, on any platform that is anti-Western, that is, pitted against the G7, so to say. After all, Prime Minister Modi for the last 5, 6, 7 years has been a regular invitee at the G7 summits. And he has, India has excellent relations with all countries of the West, barring one that has happened more recently. But that having been said, this is also, sentiment is also reflected and replicated in a number of other countries. For instance, Argentina refused to join. Saudi Arabia is also having second thoughts, basically because it thinks that it could be seen as an anti-West grouping or something of that sort. But others, UAE, it has excellent relations with the United States. You have the I2U2, which is, in terms of, good relations there. So, yes, in a manner of speaking, yes, but otherwise, we shouldn't really take it to the extreme.
We shouldn't take it to the extreme. A non-Western alliance, certainly not an anti-Western alliance. But, Manish, I'll give you the last word. I'm completely out of time. Isn't the BRICS summit this time a show of strength for Putin? Putin telling the West, you wanted to isolate me. I am far from isolated. Look at these leaders. I have these friends and partners in my corner.
Absolutely. It's a major diplomatic triumph for President Putin. And it's not only about this gathering of world leaders. What's happening, the Kazan summit is about expansion of the grouping. And, you're going to have at least 10 countries coming in as partner countries, and that will pave the way for their inclusion at the summit. So, as you were saying, that this is a non-Western grouping. What Putin and Chinese president at the same time, Russia, China, and India has also come along now, is to fashion a grouping of emerging economies and middle powers, so to speak, a sort of alternative to West-dominated institutions, West-dominated groupings. So what is Putin's idea? The G7 can go to hell. We are here. Look at the numbers. You know, despite all your efforts to isolate me, look, I am here. And with so many world leaders. So, you know, this is also about BRICS' original inspiration to provide a counterpoint. BRICS started that as a counterpoint to the West-dominated narrative and West-dominated institutions. It's also being touted, it's also being crafted as a summit of the global South.
Yes.
So what we're seeing is a larger contest about who gets to shape the world order. And Putin is saying, listen, we are here, we will not take it lying down.
Yes. So are we witnessing a new world order taking shape? Well, that certainly is the message that Putin would like to send out to the West. I'm completely out of time. So on that note, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, Dr. Sanjay Pandey, Manish Chandan, Major General Ashwini Sivaj, thanks to all of you for joining me on Global Lens tonight. And that's a wrap on the show. Thanks for watching.
Hey, why are so many lights on? Is it Navroz?
Settling accounts, uncle?
No, writing a love letter. Check your accounts every day and ensure there is no mismatch. Exchange sends trade-related messages daily. Do timely verification. And if there is a mismatch, inform the exchange immediately.
Soch kar, samajh kar, invest kar.
How do you fill